She leaned close, whispered, "Don't tell your father about this," and smiled, and suddenly, everything felt different. The day had started like any other. I was heading over to my friend's house after class, the usual casual invitation for homework and a bit of gaming. The sunlight filtered through the leaves outside, throwing dappled shadows across the sidewalk, and I found myself enjoying the quiet rhythm of the walk. I didn't know it yet, but today would feel a little different. When I stepped inside, the warm scent of freshly brewed tea hit me immediately, a comforting mix of bergamot and something softer, more delicate. The living room looked the way it always did, cozy, lived in, familiar. But then she appeared. My friend's mom moved across the room with an effortless grace, carrying a tray with cups balanced neatly in her hands. She was in her early 40s, her posture relaxed yet elegant, and there was an ease about her that made the space feel alive. She glanced up and smiled, and I felt an unexpected flutter in my chest. It wasn't flirtation, not overtly, but there was a subtle warmth in her eyes, a quiet confidence that somehow made the room feel smaller and closer all at once. The sunlight caught in her hair as she tucked a loose strand behind her ear, and for a moment, I noticed the gentle curve of her smile, the way her shoulders shifted naturally as she moved. "Finally decided to join us," she said with a teasing tone, setting the tray down on the low table. Her voice was calm, familiar, but carried a softness that lingered even after she spoke. I nodded, trying not to fumble over my words, aware that she was watching me in that quiet, knowing way, the way someone notices small things, like the hesitation in your movements or the careful way you pick up a cup. We shared a few polite words, but it was more than conversation. There was a rhythm to the room now, the clink of cups, the faint smell of tea mixing with sunlight, and the occasional soft laugh she let slip when my friend made a joke. Every detail seemed magnified, the way her fingers brushed the edge of the table, the gentle tilt of her head as she listened, the lightness in her step as she moved past me. I told myself I was imagining it. Yet I couldn't deny the strange tug of curiosity, the quiet attention I found myself giving her. It was harmless, I told myself. Just noticing. And yet, in that brief morning light, with her warm glance and soft laugh, something felt different. Something that made the ordinary visit feel a little more significant. And then she teased, lightly, almost playfully, "Don't get too comfortable, your friend might get jealous." It wasn't a serious warning, but the way she said it, with a small, knowing smile, made my chest tighten just slightly. Innocent curiosity had a way of slipping quietly into something more, and I had no idea how far it might go. The afternoon settled into a quiet rhythm. My friend had gone upstairs to grab something, leaving me alone with his mom in the kitchen. I tried to focus on the textbook I had brought, pretending I was deeply immersed in algebra or history, but the space around me felt charged in an unspoken way. Every small sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the clatter of utensils, the faint ticking of a clock, seemed louder, more intimate. She leaned over the counter, arranging some freshly cut fruit on a plate. Her movements were casual, fluid, yet there was an elegance in the way she carried herself that I couldn't ignore. She glanced at me and smiled, that same warm, slightly mischievous smile from the morning, and something shifted. The air seemed heavier, the kind of weight that comes from noticing someone more deeply than you should. "Careful, don't drop that," she said softly, her voice almost teasing, as if she were aware of my wandering thoughts. Then, leaning a little closer to reach for a knife, she added, with a playful lilt, "Don't tell your father about this." The words themselves were harmless, light-hearted even, but the way she said them made my chest tighten. There was a quiet intimacy in her tone, an unspoken acknowledgement that we shared a little secret in that moment. Our hands brushed briefly as I passed her a bowl, and the contact, brief as it was, sent a strange warmth up my arm. I could feel the softness of her skin, the gentle pressure of her fingers against mine, and for a fleeting second, the world outside the kitchen faded. My mind buzzed with thoughts I barely understood, curiosity, admiration, an odd thrill at the closeness. She caught me looking, noticed the way my eyes lingered, and she laughed lightly, a sound that was both comforting and teasing. "You've been staring," she said, but there was no reproach in her voice. Just a subtle acknowledgement, a quiet playfulness that made it impossible to look away. I felt a strange mix of emotions, the urge to stay close, to learn more about her, tempered by the awareness that this was her home, her family, and that my feelings were just beginning to surface. It was a delicate balance of fascination and hesitation, of wanting to reach out but knowing I needed to respect the boundaries that existed between us. And yet, in that kitchen, with the sunlight spilling across the counter and the faint scent of fruit and tea surrounding us, I realized that something had shifted. There was an unexpected connection forming, subtle and fragile, but undeniable. The way she smiled at me, the playful tease, and the gentle brush of her hand, it was a quiet invitation into a world I hadn't even realized I wanted to explore. The days that followed carried a quiet, almost imperceptible tension. I found myself noticing her in ways that startled me, catching fleeting glimpses of gestures that I couldn't seem to ignore. It wasn't anything overt, just the way she laughed at my friend's jokes a little too warmly, the casual brush of her hand against mine when passing something, or the subtle way her eyes lingered for a beat longer than usual. One afternoon, I was helping her carry groceries into the kitchen. A carton of juice slipped slightly from my hands, and she reached out, steadying it. Our fingers touched again, lightly, but the contact felt heavier than it should have. Warmth spread along my arm, a quiet reminder of her presence. I caught myself looking at her face, trying to read the expression behind her calm, knowing eyes. She smiled, faintly amused, and it sent a strange, unfamiliar flutter through my chest. Even small conversations held weight now. She would ask how I was doing with school or casually mention things about her own day, and the way she spoke, the softness of her voice, the slight tilt of her head, the almost imperceptible brushing of hair from her face, made it impossible to focus on anything else. I was aware of my breathing, of the heat rising in my cheeks when her glance caught mine, and of the way my heart seemed to stumble over itself. I started to notice the spaces between us, the pauses in conversation that hung longer than necessary. There was a rhythm to it, a delicate balance of approach and withdrawal, a subtle game of proximity that neither of us fully acknowledged aloud. Every time our hands brushed, while reaching for a plate, passing a cup, or fixing a small mishap in the kitchen, it carried an unspoken tension, a quiet acknowledgement of curiosity and something more. Yet, I couldn't act on it. There was a constant, underlying sense of hesitation. She was my friend's mother, after all. Social boundaries and the weight of propriety pressed heavily on my mind. And still, the magnetic pull remained, an irresistible draw to her warmth, her confidence, her presence. It was maddeningly subtle, a tension that existed entirely in glances, gestures, and the spaces between words. By the time my friend returned, the moment had passed, but the memory lingered. My chest felt tight, my thoughts scattered. I realized that in these ordinary, everyday encounters, something extraordinary was quietly taking root. Silent tension had become a constant companion, a whispered reminder of the connection I couldn't yet name, and the quiet thrill of proximity that left me longing for more, yet painfully aware of the line I couldn't cross. It was one of those quiet evenings where the world outside seemed to pause, leaving only the soft hum of the house and the golden light of the lamp spilling across the living room. My friend had gone out for a brief errand, leaving me alone with his mother. The air felt different this time, less charged with teasing, more tender, as if it had been waiting for a moment like this. She settled on the couch with a cup of tea, and I sat across from her, awkwardly shifting in the chair. Neither of us spoke at first, the silence was comfortable, not forced. Then, almost as if testing the waters, she began to talk, not about trivial things, but about herself. About life, about challenges, small regrets, moments of longing that she rarely shared with anyone. Her voice was soft, yet firm, carrying the weight of honesty. She didn't make it dramatic or heavy, it was quiet truthfulness, spoken with the casual grace that made every word seem effortless. I listened, captivated by the cadence of her speech, the subtle flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, the small way her fingers played with the rim of her cup. It was intimate, not in a physical sense, but in the deep, unspoken acknowledgement of trust. For the first time, I saw her differently. Not just as my friend's mother, but as someone complex, layered, and quietly remarkable. The warmth of the room wrapped around us, mingling with the faint scent of her perfume, something soft, almost floral, grounding in its familiarity. I wanted to say something, to offer reassurance, but the right words eluded me. Instead, I let my hand rest lightly on the edge of hers as she set the cup down, a subtle gesture of comfort and attention. She didn't flinch, if anything, she gave a small, fleeting smile, one that conveyed gratitude without a single word. My heart thudded quietly in my chest. It was a strange combination of awe, protectiveness, and a growing awareness that my feelings were more complicated than I had expected. We continued to sit there in silence for a few moments, the kind that doesn't feel empty but full of meaning. She shifted slightly closer on the couch, not intentionally provocative, but in a way that made the space between us feel intimate. I noticed the light in her eyes, a glimmer of trust, a quiet acknowledgement that this shared moment mattered. And in that soft, golden light, I realized something: this wasn't about mischief or playful teasing anymore. It was about connection. About understanding someone deeply, noticing the little vulnerabilities, and feeling honored to be a part of that. It was the beginning of an emotional bond that neither of us could fully define yet, but both of us quietly cherished. The days that followed were filled with small, quiet rituals that seemed to weave us closer together. It started with trivial things: a misplaced book, a stubborn jar lid, a simple laugh over a minor accident, but each interaction carried an unspoken significance that neither of us could ignore. It was the kind of closeness that doesn't announce itself, it grows quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize it's impossible to ignore. One afternoon, I was helping her in the kitchen, washing vegetables while she chopped. The light from the window caught her hair, giving it a golden glow, and I found myself watching the way she moved, careful, deliberate, yet effortless. Our hands brushed repeatedly over the counter, fleeting touches that left warmth lingering long after contact. Each brush of her fingers sent a quiet shiver up my arm, a reminder of the strange, tender tension building between us. We laughed together easily, over the messiness of cooking or the way I almost dropped a knife. She teased me gently, her eyes sparkling with amusement, and I caught the subtle curve of her lips as she smiled, lingering just a moment too long. "Careful," she said, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial, "or you might ruin everything." Her words carried an intimacy that wasn't spoken, a subtle acknowledgement of our shared moments that went beyond simple politeness. Later, we moved to the living room with the tray of tea and a plate of snacks. Sitting side by side on the couch, the warmth of her presence seemed to fill the space. When she reached over to adjust a cushion, our hands touched again. I felt a quiet electricity, a deep comfort intertwined with something more fragile and thrilling. The scent of her perfume mingled with the faint aroma of tea, grounding the moment in a warmth that felt both safe and exhilarating. It was in these ordinary moments that the connection deepened, the way she laughed at my awkward jokes, the small gestures of care, the silent understanding in her eyes. Each glance, each shared smile, carried an unspoken dialogue that words could never capture. The playful teasing, the gentle nudges, and the lingering touches created a rhythm, a quiet intimacy that neither of us forced but both of us felt deeply. By the end of the day, as I stood to leave, she gave me that same mischievous smile and whispered, almost teasingly, "Don't tell your father about this." My chest tightened, and I realized that these shared moments, simple, quiet, and profoundly human, had become something I looked forward to, something that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. In her presence, the world felt warmer, closer, and impossibly inviting. It was during one of those quiet, unremarkable evenings that the realization struck me, suddenly, sharply, yet gently, like the first hint of dusk at the end of a long day. I had been helping her tidy up after an impromptu tea session with my friend. The room smelled faintly of baked cookies, mixed with the lingering softness of her perfume, and sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting warm patterns across the floor. The ordinary felt different in her presence. I noticed her looking at me, not in the way a mother looks at her friend's child, but with a quiet attentiveness that made my chest tighten. Her eyes held a depth that I hadn't recognized before, a subtle spark, a glimmer of something unspoken. The air between us was heavy, charged with a slow, simmering energy. It wasn't physical in the conventional sense, it was far more complicated, far more delicate. It was the intimacy of being seen, truly seen, and the realization that I wanted to be seen by her in return. When our hands brushed as I passed her a stack of napkins, the contact lingered just slightly too long. I felt the warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her fingers, and an unspoken connection that made the room shrink to just the two of us. I caught my own reflection in the window for a moment and noticed the rapid beating of my heart, the sudden awareness of my own longing. It was confusing and exhilarating all at once. I wanted to lean closer, to ask questions I wasn't ready to ask, to stay in this space a little longer, yet I knew the boundaries that existed. She wasn't just someone I admired from afar, she was layered, nuanced, and aware of the effect she had on me. And yet, there was something in the way she moved, smiled, and occasionally let her gaze linger, that suggested she noticed the pull as much as I did. The tension was no longer playful or teasing, it had deepened into something almost tangible. Every small gesture, every soft glance, carried weight. The warmth of her presence, the quiet steadiness of her voice, the way she occasionally leaned toward me while arranging something on the table, all of it became impossible to ignore. I realized then that my feelings had evolved into something far more profound than casual admiration. And in that realization, there was a strange comfort, a quiet understanding that, even if nothing overtly changed, this connection was significant. It wasn't just about longing or curiosity anymore, it was about awareness, intimacy, and the delicate acknowledgement of something quietly precious between us. The afternoon sun had begun to dip low, spilling a soft, golden glow through the living room windows. It was quiet, almost serene, with only the faint rustle of leaves outside and the occasional distant hum of traffic to remind me the world still existed beyond this space. I sat beside her on the couch, both of us nursing cups of tea we hadn't finished, the warmth from the mug spreading through our hands, grounding us in the moment. She shifted slightly, adjusting a cushion behind her back, and our knees brushed, a subtle contact, light but undeniably present. I felt a flutter in my chest, a quiet awareness of the closeness that had grown between us over the past days. There was no need for words, the silence was full, comforting, and intimate in a way that only comes from shared understanding. Her eyes met mine, and I noticed the softness there, the faint, unguarded vulnerability she had shown before, now mixed with something warmer, quieter, like trust settling into its place. She reached over to brush a stray lock of hair from my forehead, her fingers lingering just a fraction longer than necessary, and I felt a gentle warmth, like the faintest ember of a fire. There was a pause, unspoken, where neither of us moved, and yet in that moment, everything felt full. We laughed softly at a shared memory, the kind of trivial, everyday thing that somehow feels monumental when shared with someone who truly sees you. Her laughter carried a melody I had begun to recognize, one that made my chest feel light and heavy all at once. When she leaned back and let her head rest briefly against my shoulder, it was not forced or suggestive, just comfort, closeness, and a quiet acknowledgement of the connection we had nurtured together. I realized then that the teasing phrase she had repeated so often, "Don't tell your father about this," was no longer just playful. It had become a symbol of our bond, a private thread weaving through ordinary life, something we shared quietly and cherished together. Each brush of our hands, each glance, each small touch had built a connection that was both delicate and resilient, growing without fanfare, without rush. As the sunlight faded, she looked at me, smiled softly, and there was a warmth in that smile that spoke volumes. I returned it, quietly, contentedly, understanding that this bond, subtle and unspoken, was complete in its own way. It didn't need to be declared or dramatized, it existed, quietly, beautifully, and fully. I left the house that evening with a sense of calm wonder, carrying with me the memory of her warmth, the gentle steadiness of her presence, and the quiet, tender affection that had grown between us. It was a connection built slowly, carefully, and now it rested in that perfect space between familiarity and something infinitely more profound. And for the first time, I felt completely at peace with it. If you felt the warmth of their connection and want to see more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check the link in the description for the full story.